Thank you, all three of you, for a fascinating panel. Questions, remarks? Yes, please. And after that, Maren. Just wait for the microphone.
First of all, thank you. It was very interesting. Are there other techniques used by poets? I mean, what you described seems to be natural for epics. So it's natural epic to chronotopos, using Barthén's terminology. What are the other kinds of poetic, geographical techniques in Greek and Roman poetry?
These are the basic techniques, either common sense geography or descriptive geography or scientific geography.
Yeah, is scientific geography
in poetry? Not that I recall now. No, not that I recall now. Periagesis written in meter, right? So it's poetry. Yes, it's not right. In terms of genre, because of the meter, so it's poetry, right?
Maren, you had a question?
Thank you. I guess I have two questions, one for Daniela and one for Jonathan. So if I remember your lecture correctly, Daniela, you drew a kind of an indirect connection between intuitive or experience geography and orality, right? Because even when Homer is kind of imitated and there's a kind of a primary textual level, you still emphasize that we get an echo of the kind of oral poetry. So I wanted to probe you a bit on this. How far would you go there in your claim? And I'm kind of asking this because I remember Pliny's kind of geography of the Essenes at the Dead Sea. There's this kind of ongoing debate when he uses the description and I went and so on, whether he has actually written sources. And I can't remember now what the written sources have been proposed, but I think the argument there was that this kind of experience geography is actually kind of a form of written geography, not oral. So.
Yes, so I hinted at that in one sentence, that we see traces of experiential geography, of common sense geography in all genres. I think originally it's oral because that's the way people speak, but it's also very easy to explain like that, spatial relationships and connections, and it penetrates into written, it's textualized actually in all kinds of genres, and this is what I'm trying to do in another section of my research now, to see how and when and if there is any methodology related to that, because it really is there in historiography as well, and we see that in other genres sometimes. The expression of distances through time, and also some other typical components of common sense geography.
And how can I jump on this? And how much does the Virgil adopt from, for instance, Latin historiography, descriptions of war, strategic points, and full of them? How much he adopts this kind of experimental?
A little bit. There's a combination. This is why I can show that in some parts he chooses to imitate Homer, actually.
Right.
It's not that he's ignorant, and common sense geography is not a symbol of ignorance, not at all. But it's a special way of delivering geography.
But that's the main difference, because Homer didn't have right?
Exactly.
Written historiography
exactly. That's
to
the
follow.
difference between originally oral poetry and imitating oral poetry.
Okay. Maren, you had a second question.
I also had a question for Jonathan. I was, of course, very intrigued by your last point, the Jewish feature of this. And if I understood you correctly, you were saying, at least from your kind of the research that you have been doing so far and your own interest in Jewish history, the example is of the exception is the Jewish example. So I just wondered whether you think that will be the conclusion. Are there no other kind of conflicts that are described?
No, I don't think that will be the conclusion. This is sort of a prolegomena, just something that's webmaster. I think in general, all the big ones. In other words, when I first thought what to do for this talk, I want to do something about race or ethnicity. And what I'm working on now is Stasis. I thought, well, it's a short lecture. There's nothing. Because, I just thought of the big ones. And all the Roman ones and most of the Greek ones are, as I said, between Greeks, they thought they were being ethnic, but from a different perspective, not. But then I thought, well, what about the Jews in Alexandria? And it would be interesting and quite actually astounding if the internal conflicts in cities, the only ones we could define as actually ethnic by any sort of standard we want to use, were with Jews. That would be interesting. In those cases, the Jews were long-standing residents of this, who thought of themselves as citizens. So they were actually this meets all the criteria for a stasis of a war. And I actually don't know if anyone, I was actually hoping someone would say, well, you didn't think about this and this. And well, thank you, now I will think about it. But that's the only one I could think of until I had to write the lecture. So I don't know. It's the most conspicuous one, let me put it that way. Now again, I have to say, as with all ancient history, there might have been ethnic civil wars that just didn't make it into the evidence, because even many civil, people have documented thousands of civil wars, but just like with one word. So the reality might be obscured from our eyes. But what we can see, so far as I can see, so far the only one I've seen is with Jews.
Because in Claudius's edict, when it's stasis or polemos,
right?
I always thought that polemos is simply kind of more intensive.
Right, I know.
You connected it then to the city, not their own, and put this into a kind of the larger theoretical framework.
Exactly.
Distinguishing between polemos and stasis. And I just wondered how theoretically sophisticated Claudius was in that edict, and whether
he even said it in Greek or not. I tried to cover myself on that. It might not have been. In other words, the shot, as it were, is to say, well, stasis is the more confined rather than, he's saying this was so violent that we'll call it a polemos. And fluvios, I don't know. It could be, that's the tip. But I'm thinking, well, but if you're actually speaking in Greek, those words, two words in Greek, are, as you can see in philosophy and in historical Thucydides and all other historical, including Josephus, he's careful about when he says stasis, are so poignant. I thought, okay, maybe there is something here, because when he says it's not a stasis, it's a polemos, meaning these are two foreign elements. So he wants to emphasize that the Jews, in fact, were not citizens. He doesn't give them that, right? And therefore, it would be a polemos. Who knows with Claudius as well, because when we actually is quoted, like the Lugdunum description was actually quoted per se, his mind is wandering. He can't focus. He has ADHD. Right? So maybe he was saying this, no, not that, whatever. But just taking the text as it is, that's all we have. I think it's not outlandish to say maybe he was making a conceptual distinction there between the kind of conflict it might be. Okay?
You were talking about Alexandria. What about Seleucide Jerusalem? Right, the Hasmonean revolt, because it's well, if you read it, if you read Maccabee too, it's like it's a polemos. But if you analyze it as a historian, it's a stasis.
Okay, it's a stasis within the Jewish population.
Yeah, exactly. It's a civil war.
It's both.
It's both.
It's both.
Yeah,
it's both. It's both a stasis with the Jewish population. By the way, every rebellion in antiquity that there's evidence for was both a stasis internally and a polemos against the ruling power.
But before it became a revolt.
Right. Now, let me just say briefly, people are getting, let me say briefly that one of the problems with defining a conflict as a civil war or a war, and actually in modern political theory, there's like 13 categories or more of conflict. You know, civil war, rebellion, revolution, putsch, coup d'état, and war. One of the problems is that a conflict is often not defined until it's over. So that actually, like the American Revolution was called a civil war before it was successful, it became a revolution. Same thing with the Civil War. The South was saying this is the Second American Revolution, and it might have been just written differently about in history books had the result been different. That's one of the things. Was one of the technical problems with getting a defined concept of what is civil war and what's polemos.
Okay. Thank you very much, the three of you, and I invite Ben to say a few words.